Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Diane Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is January 28th, 2026, and have I got another fantastic replay show for you. I cannot believe this is our final hiatus episode for season 4, and we actually begin season 5 next Wednesday. I can't wait, and I can't believe the hiatus is already over. Not that I actually spent any time actually relaxing. I've been doing so much work behind the scenes getting ready for season 5. We're revamping our website. We're developing more creator resources for authors to help them take control of their careers and make marketing more manageable. That's always the dream, isn't it? But that's all information for another day. Today is our final hiatus episode for Book Banter with Diane Burkhart, Season 4, and we're wrapping it up with an author who genuinely knows how to balance it all. Today's guest is an award-winning forensic technothriller author who also maintains a demanding medical career. He brings real-world science and medicine into his fiction with authority, clarity, and edge. He's also someone who has worked in both traditional and indie publishing and has found that being independent can allow him to publish faster, stay creatively flexible, and connect more directly with readers. He's smart, engaging, and thoughtful about the realities of managing craft alongside another full-time profession, and not to mention balancing work and family time. He's got some incredible insights, and you will want to hear them all. Please welcome to Book Banter with Diane Burkhart, the insightful and accomplished Dr. Joel Shulkin. Please tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
I am Joel Shulkin. I'm a developmental-behavioral pediatrician, so still in practice, and also author of medical thrillers. So in my spare time, usually around 4:30 in the morning, I work on my writing. And so I have 3 published medical thrillers already, and a 4th one is coming out in 5 days.
That's one thing that just absolutely fascinates me with doctors who are still in their medical practice, but they start publishing as well. And your publishing schedule is very impressive. How on earth do you balance those two?
Well, when I read Stephen King's On Writing book, one of the things that he said is that if you just go for a goal of even writing 500 words a day, in 6 months, you can have a 100,000 word novel written. So It's not quite that for me, but because usually it's around 80,000, but I do try to make a goal of writing about 500 words per day. And especially during the pandemic, that worked out really well. So I get up at 4:30 in the morning before the rest of my family gets up and before I'm getting ready for work. And while I'm having breakfast, I just sit down and I try to write as much as I can, shooting for that 500-word goal. Now, lately, because of publishing and promotion, I haven't been able to get as much writing done as I would like. But I still count editing and writing short stories and other things that complement the books. I still consider that part of the writing process.
Now, do you actually enjoy doing the marketing part, or are you like almost every other author that it's kind of the bane of the existence of authors? It's what you do just so that you can keep being a writer.
Yeah, it's not really my favorite thing, but it's one of those necessities that even with my first 2 books where I had a publisher, in the beginning, I assumed that they would be doing all the marketing and the advertising. And it turned out not to be the case. So I was kind of left, especially with the pandemic striking right before my first book released. There wasn't a lot that was being done. And so by the second book, I really learned, okay, I have to do more with that marketing and learn what to do. And then by the third book, where I was self-publishing, I had to do everything. So I've gotten to like it a little bit more. Like I definitely enjoy doing podcasts and doing book readings and events and signings and things like that. And I do like some of the design, like I design my own graphics and ads, but it's just the whole having to keep push the book and talk about the book, promoting the book. That kind of gets to me. It's not my favorite part.
The one thing that I was really amazed about and some of the information that you sent me was that you actually had a great mentor when you decided to become an author.
That's true. Very good one. When I had just gotten out of the military during my service for my health profession scholarship and just coming back from Germany, I had a year before fellowship where I was living in Boston. And during that time, I started getting into writing. Just before I started fellowship, I attended a medical society meeting of the Massachusetts Medical Society. And it just happened to be that Michael Palmer, one of the legendary medical thriller authors, who was also a Massachusetts resident, was there and talking about his journey and experience with writing medical thrillers. So I ended up attending his talk and then talking to him afterwards and telling him, hey, I had just won a contest for medical fiction. It was just a short story that I'd written and that I was thinking about writing a book. He immediately offered to give me any guidance, to give me a list of agents to query. And so we kind of talked back and forth on email, and he became a really good mentor and supporter. And unfortunately, when he died, that was a big loss for me, as for many people. But on the positive side, I've become very good friends with his son, Daniel, or DJ Palmer. So whenever I run to him and at conferences, we always, chat. And he actually wrote a blurb for my first book when it was published.
That's incredible.
And that's a nice thing, is that most authors, I think, no matter how well published they are, no matter how new they are, they want to support each other. A lot of readers think that we're competing with each other, and we're not. Most of us want to help each other, and we all remember what we went through trying to get where we are now. So I've had Tess Gerritsen, who's answered my questions. I've gone through conferences. I've met a lot of great authors who have written blurbs for my books, and some who have become really good friends of mine. So it's a really great network.
Oh, definitely. I mean, just the authors that I've met through doing this podcast have been absolutely wonderful people. There's some of them, many of them actually, and even their publicists that we've all become friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially when we're in the medical field and writing medical fiction, then I think that just brings us even closer together.
Well, yeah, you can identify with each other so much.
Right.
And I have to say, Michael Palmer must have given you some fantastic advice, because your publication schedule is actually very impressive, because your first book, Adverse Effects, came out in 2020. And then your second book, Toxic Effects, came out in 2022. And that tends to be about average for people when they're starting out, about every 2 years.
Right.
And then your third book, Heroic Measures, came out last year in 2024. But then it seems like you decided to step things up just a bit.
I did. And part of that was because, again, during the pandemic, I had a little bit more time. Mm-hmm. So I ended up writing 4 books during that time period. And I had those 4 books in some format, some stage of readiness for publication. And so I decided, why wait to get them out? I may as well just try to push them out. One thing I did learn, though, was I was keeping to kind of a fall publishing schedule, because that was what my publisher had set out. The first book came out in September of 2020, then it was September 2022. So I just put Heroic Measures for September 2024. The problem is, when Heroic Measures came out, I had 2 big events planned, Sleuth Fest and Orlando Reads Books, as opportunities to really promote the book, as well as a couple of podcasts. Then we had back-to-back hurricanes. That were the worst hurricanes that we'd ever seen in the state. And so every one of those events got canceled. And so what I learned from that is, don't launch a new book in Florida in the fall.
Yeah.
So that was actually the real reason why I decided, let me push Spontaneous Remission to May. Because then there's not a lot going on weather-wise here. That, I think, and there's not a lot else of other competition for other events. But there were some good events, like Sleuth Fest actually got pushed to next week when it was rescheduled. So I've got this great opportunity to promote the book then. And we've had a couple of local book fairs as well.
But even with book 4 coming out just a year after, you've also got your work in progress right now, Pele's Curse.
Yes.
And then next year, you have 2 books already slated to come out, Perfect Strangers and Extraordinary Measures.
Oh, I have to change those dates. I don't necessarily have those planned to come out next year yet.
Okay.
Maybe 2026. Yeah. The only one that I'm, 27. The only one that I'm probably going to release next year will be Pele's Curse.
So, but just the fact that you have gone from becoming a published author to having a very good collection of work already available and almost doubling it within the next 2 years, that's incredible.
Well, thank you. It's one of the things I've learned too, especially as an indie author, but having a back list definitely helps.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I went to these two book fairs, the first book fair that was in Tarpon Springs, I think I only had Heroic Measures and a couple of copies of my first two books. And most of the people bought Heroic Measures. But at this last book fest that I went to at Oxford Exchange a couple of weeks ago, I had one copy of every book. And so it was really interesting to see what caught different readers' eyes. Some were
Mhm.
drawn to the cover of Spontaneous Remission, showing a woman, who on one side is affected by this skin condition and then it's healing. Others really liked the military theme of the heroic measures, and then to my surprise, there were some who were like immediately drawn to the older books and wanted to buy, the series. There was one group of like four who bought one of each book as a group.
That has to feel just absolutely amazing whenever you see people coming up and being so fascinated for different reasons in everything that you're
Right.
doing.
Right. And I think that's one thing that does set me apart from some other authors. There's some well-known ones who some readers have called them a little bit formulaic. Their books tend to have similar themes, similar kind of predictable routines, but there's still the readers love it because they know what to expect. They know what to expect from those characters, or if you're reading like a long series like Bosch, you know what he's going to do, right? So whereas with my books, each one's a little different.
Mhm.
And I'm pulling from experiences like each book is set in a place where I've lived, at least for a short period of time. And they do draw on my medical experiences and some other lived experiences. But they're totally different stories and often with totally different themes.
I know in some of the bio information that you have available, it lists you as a plantser, that you're kind of
Yes.
half and half. Do you find that your process is changing as you go through more books?
Absolutely. So when I started out, I was a pure pantser. When I started writing adverse effects, all I had was the idea. And I just set out, and at that point, I was on this platform called Story. I can't remember what the number was, but it was like this thing where you can post a work, like a short story or chapter by chapter, and you get feedback on it. So I
Mhm.
literally was posting adverse effects chapter by chapter on this, one chapter a day, and writing it as I was going and kind of getting feedback along the way. So I didn't really know where I was going with it. I just had kind of a rough idea. That didn't work out so well for book two, Toxic Effects, because I wasn't sure if there was going to be a second book or when.
Mhm.
And they kept telling me to wait on writing it until we saw how the first book did. So then all of a sudden they said, okay, write it. And I realized I should have been at least developing an outline or draft before that because I had to like scramble to try to write it. And the first draft that I got, and I thought it looked good. I had a couple of my fellow authors read it over to send it to the editor, who just wrote back and said, "This sucks." That was basically the essence of what his response was. So I went and wrote again and tried again, and the same thing happened. This sucks. So by the third time, then I finally got it right. But I realized this pantsing isn't working out for me. So by the time I started working on these other books, I developed a system of at least writing the synopsis first, which is usually the bane of authors' existence.
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to write the synopsis later. But I found by writing it first and kind of figuring out as I was doing that, how is the story going to go? What's the point? Not only did it make it easier to refine the synopsis later, but it gave me some guidance as to where the book's going to go. Now, with my next books I'm working on, Extraordinary Measures and Perfect Strangers, I've actually gotten to the point where I write out, it's not a full chapter by chapter outline, but it's at least an outline with at least a bullet point for each chapter of how do I want this to go. Now, I end up, as I start writing it, I might realize, oh, this isn't going in the right direction. And then I step back and redo the outline, which is why I call it more of a planter, because I'm not stuck to that rigid outline. But at least there's a plan in place. And that has allowed me to write a lot faster.
How do you develop your characters? Whenever you're coming up with somebody, do you have a person in mind that you kind of mold to what you want for that character? Or is it something that's just completely your own imagination?
I would say sometimes there's a little bit. I mean, heroic measures, there definitely were characters that I was modeling after because the whole book is based off of comic books. So, each character, Steve is a little bit of a mixture of Captain America and Peter Parker. And his partner, he's modeled after the Falcon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in there, I had an idea of, okay, I want each character to reflect another comic book character. Obviously, General Ross is Thunderbolt Ross, right? So there's that. But like with Spontaneous Remission, it was a little bit more fluid. I just had an idea of what I wanted the characters to do, and I worked before I even wrote the outline. I really worked on all the characteristics of each character. Now, in Adverse Effects, again, most of the characters were kind of from my imagination, but I will say that Christina was based at least a little bit on my wife, because the concept was that she's Brazilian and my wife is from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And even though my wife is not a doctor or a psychiatrist, she was the inspiration for the story. She helped me come up with the idea. So when I was thinking of Christina's character, I was really thinking of how would my wife act in this situation? How would she respond? And that kind of helped me to flesh her out.
What did she think about being the inspiration for that character?
Oh, she loved it.
Now, here you already had a good career going as a pediatrician. What on earth made you want to start trying to write books?
I really had put writing aside. I used to love writing when I was in high school, and even in college I took creative writing courses. I had an eighth grade teacher who was sure I was going to be a playwright growing
Oh,
up.
nice.
So I was always interested in it. And in fact, I had a short story that I wrote in high school for an advanced English class that I didn't think was that good. I thought it was kind of all over the place. And my teacher thought it was one of the best things that she'd ever read. So I ended up rewriting that recently, like within the last few years, and got it published in Short Story America, in kind of a revised form. So it's always been something that I've wanted to do. When I left the military, after being stationed in Europe and traveling around, it was actually when I was in Denmark, visiting the castle there, and learned about the sleeping giants.
Mm-hmm.
For listeners, it's these statues that legend says that the statues would wake up when the country was in danger. And so I had this idea for like a children's book based on the sleeping giants. And I even went and made like a mock-up of it and everything. I enjoyed it so much that I started writing some short stories. And then I found this contest for medical fiction. I said, well, let me try writing this. And I wrote a short story about a doctor who is interviewing a patient who is fluidly bipolar and manic, and then it kind of leads into more of what's happening. There's more going on to the story than you realize, and ended up winning first prize in this contest. So that really gave me this inspiration of, okay, maybe there is a future for me in doing this. And then I just came up with these ideas. It was actually when I was in fellowship, and it was after my wife and I got married, and she moved here to the United States when I was living with her in Boston. When I was in fellowship, I would take the bus or the train to and from work every day. So it happened to be that on one particularly snowy winter day, there was nobody else on the bus. I got on, it was completely empty. I was really happy because it meant I could just go pick my own seat and just read and kind of tune everything out. 2 stops later, the bus stopped, and this man gets on, and he's all bundled up. And with an entirely empty bus to choose from, he goes and sits directly behind me.
That's creepy.
It was, right? I mean, to me, I was kind of uncomfortable. And I started thinking, my mind started turning and thinking, well, what if I was a woman? How creepy would that feel?
Mm-hmm.
And what if he were to lean forward and say something like, I know who you are, who you really are? And I got home and I told my wife about it and started just going from there. And she kind of asked some questions, and then the idea for adverse effects was just born right in that moment.
That's an incredible story. How long did it take you to actually finish that book after you got that inspiration?
Writing chapter by chapter, it only took about 4 or 5 months to write the first draft.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah. But keep in mind that was in 2008.
Hmm.
So it took another 10 years before I found an agent for it.
Yeah, that can take a long time. Doesn't matter how
Mhm.
good it is. You have to find the agent that wants it.
Right. And it took a lot of revisions and changes. I changed entire characters and scenes.
Hmm.
But then I felt like it was where it needed to be.
Now, I know that you are a developmental behavioral pediatrician.
Yes.
How much of your actual experience and work do you bring into your books?
Well, from what I do right now, very little. There's not a whole lot that's thrilling about being a developmental behavioral pediatrician because it's all clinic, working with kids who are autistic, with learning disabilities, developmental disorders. It's not like watching ER where somebody comes in with a gun, fortunately. Like, we don't really have that. So it's not really anything that would apply to a medical thriller. Most of what I pull on instead is kind of tangential or peripheral to what I do. So in Adverse Effects, she's a psychiatrist. And I don't deal directly with memory, but I do have patients who have some memory issues. And so it's been an area of interest for me. And I always loved movies like Total Recall and Jason Bourne that are about memory.
Hmm.
So it wasn't a huge step to go from what I do to what Christina Silva does. Now, in Heroic Measures, I'm as far removed from a medical examiner that you can get. The last time I've actually worked on a cadaver was in medical school, but at least it was something that I could draw on my military experience because I was stationed at Bitburg and Spangdahlem, so only about an hour northwest of Ramstein, where the book is set.
Hmm.
So I was able to draw on that and my understanding of how the military works. And when it came to, well, what does a medical examiner do and what would they do in this situation? That was just a matter of talking to some colleagues that I knew, including Craig Malek, who used to be the chief medical examiner for the Armed Forces Medical Examiner Service. So even as a doctor, I often have to rely on my colleagues and associates to really know what I don't already know.
Spontaneous Remission is the book that's getting ready to come out here in a few days.
Yes.
And I was hoping that you might give us a little read of something from this book.
Certainly. Spontaneous remission is about a woman who is dying of complications of end-stage scleroderma, which is an autoimmune condition that causes sclerosis of the skin, but can also, in the systemic form, can affect their organs as well. And so she's dying of kidney failure due to it. And then, miraculously, she goes into remission. And not just, full remission, but she's healthier than she's ever been in her entire life. But as her body is changing, she's losing her identity. She's changing both inside and out, and no one can figure out why. And at the same time, there is a hired killer who is trying to find this prototype panacea that he's tracked down to Clearwater, Florida, which is where the woman lives. So the question is this the greatest discovery that's ever been found in medicine, or is it the greatest threat?
Gives me chills.
So I will jump into the reading. This is from the very first chapter in Jacksonville, Florida. No one dies from being caught out in the rain anymore, unless, of course, there's a killer on your tail. That thought lurked in the mind of biomedical researcher Jean Yu Tang as he darted from awning to awning, peering through the curtain of rain from each safe harbor for signs of being followed. His heart pounded as he stood under the overhang of the University Medical Library. Meeting his friend for lunch, instead of getting away as fast as possible, had been a risk, potentially a fatal one, not only for him, but for her as well. Yet that had most likely been the last time they would meet. He'd seen her medical records. She only had a few weeks left to live. And if he didn't get away fast, he'd have much less time than that. The parking lot was barely visible through the thick sheets of rain. Lightning lit up the sky, silhouetting the trees in the courtyard, followed by a deafening boom. Jean-Yves flattened himself against the library's outer wall. A sane man would wait for the storm to abate, but desperation had banished his sanity. Dragging as much of his lab coat over his head as possible, he dashed onto the sidewalk. Lightning crackled down from the heavens. Startled, Jean-Yves sidestepped, and his foot sank into a puddle. He lost his balance as thunder echoed around him. Frantically, he waved his arms, but to no avail. He toppled over and tumbled onto the sidewalk. Gravel bit into his arm. He held back a scream and struggled to his knees. Muddy water seeped through his pants, dragging him downward. He fought to stay upright and raised his wounded arm. Blood streamed from a gash below his wrist, draining into the puddle. Clamping his other hand over the wound, Jean-Yves forced himself to stand and staggered through the rain. When he reached the edge of the parking lot, he fumbled through his pockets. Heat drained from his cheeks. His car keys weren't there. Rain soaked his lab coat as he scrambled to think of when he'd last had them. The lab, of course. When the alarm on his phone sounded, reminding him of his lunch date, he'd been so desperate that he must have forgotten to grab the keys from his desk drawer. He could see his Volvo sedan in the middle of the parking lot. Maybe he could smash in a window and hotwire the car. Sparks of hope and excitement ignited at the idea. But just as quickly he snuffed them out. For all his experience with biotechnology, he was clueless when it came to engines. Rather than start the car, he'd more likely electrocute himself. He had no other choice but to return to the biomedical research building. Water sloshed in his shoes as he stumbled down the hallway 10 minutes later. When he reached his lab, he groped under his coat until he found his badge and swiped it in the card reader. A click heralded the door unlocking. Then he pushed his way inside and kicked the door shut before pausing to take stock of the room. The trash bag stuffed with shredded paper remained on the floor where he'd left it, next to the smashed hard drives. Scurrying to his desk, he tried to ignore the heavy pounding of his heart. All he needed was to grab his keys. Then he could drive far away from there as quickly as possible before anyone knew he was gone. He'd have to get in touch with Misty, of course, and she could help him find somewhere safe. But that could wait until he was on the road. He threw open the drawer. Jean-Yves' heart stopped. The drawer was empty. Thunder crashed and the lights blinked out. The hairs on Jean-Yves' arms prickled as he scanned the darkness. The emergency lights clicked on, casting an eerie red glow. A light jingle sounded behind him. As he turned his head toward the sound, strong hands gripped his shoulders and bent him in half. His temple cracked against the edge of the desk. White-hot light flooded his field of vision. Fighting against the pain, Jean-Yves jerked his head backward. His assailant chuckled and rammed an elbow into Jean-Yves' back, making his breath release in a whoosh. One of the hands grabbed him by the chin and wrenched his head to the side before jamming his face into the desk. Something sliced the flesh of his cheek, and he screamed. A dark figure moved into view, holding up a small object. The red light glinted off it. Jean-Yves' car key. Blood dripped from its tip. "Looking for this?" The man's voice was guttural, as if forced through his windpipe. "Give me what I want, and I'll hand it back. Resist, and I'll ram it into the back of your hand." "Please," Jean-Yves managed to say between his teeth as the man continued to press his cheek against the desk. Fear froze his bones. "My wallet's in my back pocket. Take it. Please don't hurt me anymore." The man scoffed. "Don't play dumb. You know what I'm after." "No, I don't." Jean-Yves knew full well, but he allowed his voice to waver, praying he sounded convincing. "I don't know what you want. Please, let me go." The man grabbed Jean-Yves' wrist and slammed it onto the desk. Before Jean-Yves could pull away, the key plunged into the back of his hand. Pain burned up his arm, and he howled. "Let's try this again." The man pressed Jean-Yves' face harder against the desk and positioned the key over his eye. "Where is the prototype?"
That is amazing. And I have to say, whenever you're doing podcasts, any opportunity that you have to read, you should do it because whenever you started doing the voices, it actually took me by surprise and it was just absolutely amazing. You're really good at this.
Well, thank you.
Where are your books available for purchase?
Almost everywhere. They're available in Barnes & Noble, they're on Amazon, bookshop.org, which I highly recommend because you can buy through your local bookshop that way. The previous books are all available also in Kobo. Heroic Measures is on Audible and through other audiobooks.com and some others. I narrated Heroic Measures myself and edited the whole audiobook myself, so that is available as well. Spontaneous Remission, I just this week made the decision to enroll it in Kindle Unlimited, so the only way you can find the ebook will be through Kindle, but at least for the first 3 months. But that way, if you do have Kindle Unlimited, then you have access to it that way. I'm holding off on doing the audiobook for now. I was because so many of the characters are female. I was thinking of trying to get a female narrator. But I'll have to see. I'm thinking of maybe doing a second launch, which will be more for the audiobook a little later on.
You had mentioned earlier that Heroic Measures was based on comic book heroes.
Yes.
What is your favorite comic book?
Growing up, it was a tie between Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk, which is why there's a lot of references to both in Heroic Measures. But as I got older, and especially when the movies came out, I really became a big fan of Captain America. And both the Captain Americas that we have right now, I think, represent what we want America to be, you know, and not holding to one specific ideology, but rather thinking about how can we support each other as a society. And so that whole super soldier concept always resonate with me, and so that was why I sat down with Heroic Measures. Once I got the original concept of, well, what would happen if you were a medical examiner and the dead person in front of you woke up in the middle of the autopsy? Once I had that point, I knew I really wanted to make this more of like a super soldier project retold with a dark twist.
That's definitely a dark twist.
Yes.
Waking up in the middle of your own autopsy.
Yep. And so I made a point of trying to make the characters, again, reflect the comic book characters, but also bring in some of the concepts that we often see in comic books, like what is heroism? So there's a lot of references, there's a lot of Easter eggs in there. One thing that readers may not know is that almost all the characters are named after either a writer or an illustrator of Captain America comics.
Oh, nice. I love that.
Yeah.
I've been a comic book fan since I was a kid. When I was in 5th grade, I started getting a subscription to Thor.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
That was one of my favorite ones growing up.
Yeah, I liked some of the ones, especially when Thor, was sometimes trapped in the body of a human and then of a mortal and had to recover that. I was always big into the gods when I was younger. And in fact, the other thing that I started writing before I wrote the medical thrillers, when I got back from Germany, was I was writing a book series about gods from all the different pantheons that were living as normal people in the village of New York City.
I like that idea. You need to do that one someday.
I'm still working on it because the idea of the first book is that someone is killing the gods of the underworld and this cop is brought in to try to figure out who it is. So I do have it. I started rewriting it, and at some point I probably will try to redo it.
That is definitely one I would want to read. So now seems like a good time to do our 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but I'm too nosy to stop doing it.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes. Is that the first one?
No, no.
Okay.
They're not that easy.
Okay.
Question 1. Do you have any phobias?
Nothing too serious. I would say a little bit of a fear of hornets and wasps, and that's only because when I was a kid, at one point, I was visiting a neighbor and not realizing that there was a wasp nest under the railing, and my
Oh,
hand, as I was holding the railing, a bunch of them just flew out and stung me and chased me
yeah.
home. So
That could
I'm,
put a fear in you.
yeah. So I actually would have nightmares about them sometimes, but and it's hard for me to say because I'm always been a nature lover, loving all animals and even insects. I don't go out of my way to kill them.
Hmm.
Even if there's a wasp in the house, I'll usually try to catch it with a glass and kind of take it out that way. But if I had to pick, that's the one that I doesn't make me sit very easily.
I can understand that. That's a reasonable one.
Yes.
Say for me, I am horrifically claustrophobic. And I did
Yeah.
not find that out until my first MRI.
Oh, yes, that would do it. I have a little bit of claustrophobia as well. It used to be worse. I think I've gotten better with it, but it's not, I wouldn't go out of my way to try to be in a tight space. That's actually why I couldn't be a surgeon because just wrapped up in all the mask and gown and everything for a long period of time, it was just too much for me.
Yeah, I know. Question two. Assuming that you and your wife still go on date nights, what is your
Ah,
favorite thing to do?
oh my gosh, when's the last time we had a date night? Is usually right now it's usually a matter of what we have time to do because it may only be an hour or two. And
Hmm.
what is nice, I think, is when like a couple times we have been able to go to like a party where there's other adults, so
Yeah.
like a holiday party or something, and that's nice where we get to just spend a little time. What I really would like would be when we have time to go dancing together because that's something we used to do a lot when we were younger. That's actually one of the first things we did when we met was go dancing. So I think that would probably be the best one.
I like that answer. Now, question three. If you could relive one moment in your life, what would it be?
Oh, that's hard because I've had a lot of good moments. I think one that was probably a bit, I mean, besides the obvious, like, have our wedding again, the birth
Hmm.
of our child, our twins, like all those would be great. But one experience that was really good was when I was in college and I was in charge of voter registration for our student government, not knowing that at the time, the state of New Hampshire had laws requiring birth certificate or passport in order to register to vote, which
Hmm.
most students don't carry with them when they go off to college.
Yeah.
And it was even worse in our town because they required registration during school hours, during times that most students couldn't get there, and you had to go in person. And a lot of it was designed to keep students from voting. And they were
Hmm.
very clear about that. They didn't want students voting in their town elections because they would do crazy things like vote to use town funds to build a 1 mile high by 1 inch by 1 inch statue. So they had reasons for it,
Yeah.
but in my state of mind, it really didn't make sense. And so I ended up contacting off the back of an REM CD the group Rock the Vote, and they got right in touch with me. They came out to do this big statewide campaign, put me and my friend in charge of it, brought out Sarah Jessica Parker, Billy Baldwin, Henry Rollins, MTV Raps, and MTV News, and we did this whole thing. That in itself was such a great experience. But then after that, they called and chose me to go and represent them at the bill signing for the motor voter bill at the White House,
Wow.
which meant that I got introduced by Al Gore and then introduced Bill Clinton.
That's cool.
Yeah,
And the fact that it happened off of something that most people just take for granted, you actually took action.
right. Yeah. So that's why, with all this talk about the SAVE Act and some others, I've still been vocal about that. Like, no, that's not, we worked hard to get this changed. Voting is both a right and a responsibility. It shouldn't be
Mhm.
a privilege.
Right. That's very cool.
Yeah. So it's definitely a once in a lifetime experience.
I can see why that would be a good one to relive too. Question four. I know you have twin daughters. What is one piece of advice that you would give them for their life?
Oh my gosh. I think, we tell them a lot of things. The biggest one that we tell them is to be themselves. especially for twins, because it's easy for twins to try to compare to each other or to try to copy one or the other. And they're as different as could be, even though they're best friends. And so we really try to emphasize with them that it's okay to have different interests. It's okay to be different and to pursue your own dreams, not to let anybody tell you what you can and can't do with your life.
Are they identical?
They're not. They're fraternal. One looks just like me. The other looks just like her mom, but they have opposite personalities.
We actually have twin girls too, and they're fraternal. And
Wow.
they look nothing alike.
Yep.
And they are polar opposites.
Right. Well, and my wife has darker skin. I'm very pale. And so you can imagine, how different they look from each other.
Now, for question 5, I've been asking everybody the same thing because I'm building a list that we're going to print in our year-end book buying guide. What is the one author when somebody asks you for a book recommendation? Who's the first author that you go to?
Well, typically, I usually recommend Tess Gerritsen because I think, even though Michael Palmer I would also recommend and strongly recommend, I love his books, the very first medical thriller that I read and just fell in love with was Tess Gerritsen's Harvest. And I think it's just like a flawless medical thriller. And it's also dear to my heart because I work a lot with international adoptees. And of course, it's about international adoptees who are being sold and harvested for their organs. So it's a really creepy book, but it's just really, really well done.
Well, and there's been a lot of discussion, at least on this podcast this year, about adoption and especially international adoptions.
Okay.
It's been quite a topic. So that book recommendation goes right along with a lot of the stuff that we've done this year.
Well, international adoptions had fallen off for a while, but over the last year or two, I've been getting calls at least 1 or 2 a month for pre-adoption consults. So there's definitely a lot more happening again.
Now, let's go ahead and remind everybody one more time who you are and what you do.
So I'm Joel Shulkin. I'm a developmental-behavioral pediatrician and author of medical thrillers.
And we will have all of your information for your social media and your buy links for your books in the description of today's podcast. And of course, on our website at burkhartbooks.com/podcast. And you will also be in the year-end book buying guide that comes out for holiday shopping.
Woohoo!
Thank you so much for doing this. I know you have got to be incredibly busy. So the fact that you were able to take an hour with me is just unbelievable. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So there you have it, folks. My interview with the incredible Dr. Joel Shulkin. Be sure to go check out the description of today's podcast and check out all of his books. He's got an incredible collection and more are coming all the time. So that wraps up our final hiatus replay episode for season 4. Oh my gosh, I feel a little teary. Now, next week, we are coming back to kick off season 5 of Book Banter with Diane Burkhart, your book talk podcast, and we are going to do it with a real bang. We have got an incredible author that we have been trying to get our schedules to sync for quite a while, and it finally happened. And oh my gosh, I am so happy, and you're going to be happy too when you get to hear this interview. We're kicking off season 5 with the multi-number-1 New York Times best-selling author, E.K. Johnston. You might know her from the many books that she has written in the Star Wars franchise, and also she has written in Dungeons and Dragons franchise as well. We're going to be talking to her about one of her recent books, Sky on Fire, which blends Arthurian legend with interstellar conflict in a way that is smart, unexpected, and absolutely compelling. We're also going to dig into how she has built a full-time paid writing career, how she makes decisions about what to write next, and how she approaches writing not just as an art, but as a sustainable profession. It's a conversation every book fan should hear. You will definitely not want to miss this episode. We'll see you here next week. So you know what time it is, folks. It's time for you all to go forth and be really happy that season 5 is coming soon.